events can seem like a jigsaw puzzle, disconnected pieces of news that lack clear meaning to you and me. A framework is available that ties these events together, that makes it possible to better understand their effect on your future. But first you must learn how to solve the prophecy puzzle. Join us next on The World Tomorrow, and we'll see how.
This week on The World Tomorrow, David Albert.
What a world we live in today. Things are changing so fast, we're bombarded 24 hours a day with information from every corner of the earth. But what does it all mean? And how do we make sense of it all? Does anyone know where it's all heading? There's no shortage of ideas. We have books on just about every topic, analyzing the world scene from every angle. But sometimes, even the experts are taken by surprise. Who could have foreseen the dramatic events of last summer in China, or the shifting of moods in other communist countries? In recent months, we've seen the Soviet president being given a hero's welcome in West Germany, Hungary dismantling a section of the Iron Curtain, and the once banned trade union Solidarity winning the Polish election. There are some big changes and major shifts taking place on the world scene. Every day, the news seems more perplexing. It's like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. How does it all fit together? Is there any source we can turn to find out what it all means? Yes, there is. Would it surprise you if I said that the answers can be found in this book, the Bible? Yes, the Bible. A lot of us value the Bible as a guide to personal conduct and morality. But today I'd like to show you that the Bible also contains answers to the questions that you and I have about the future. This book can help us make sense of the flood of information we get every day from television, radio, and newspapers. Those answers can be found, believe it or not, in some very much misunderstood books of the Bible. Books like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and the book of the Apocalypse, or Revelation. In these books, we can find information that will give us an insight into the future. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the Bible is a crystal ball and that you can look into prophecy and ask, what's going to happen in the next 10 years? Or will the economy collapse? Or who will be the next president or prime minister? No, that's not what I mean when I say prophecy answers questions about the future. What I want to show you on today's World Tomorrow program is how an understanding of Bible prophecy will give you a frame of reference that will help you put world events into perspective. It's somewhat like putting together pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. The first thing you do is find the pieces that make up the frame. Then, once the frame is built, you have a starting point. And then you can begin to see where the other pieces fit together. And piece by piece, the picture becomes clearer. Bible prophecy is very similar. It provides the framework of the future. As we'll see, the Bible shows that what may seem like isolated and unrelated incidents are stages in the fulfillment of a plan that God has set in motion. But a logical question some people would ask is, if the Bible contains this information about the future, why haven't we recognized it before now? Surely even the biggest skeptic would have to take the Bible more seriously if he could open it up and find the news of the day prophesied before his eyes. Well, it isn't quite that easy. It isn't just a question of reading a prophetic book and seeing the answer in plain language. Most prophecy hasn't come down to us that way. Most of the books of prophecy were composed well over 2,000 years ago, long before the birth of Jesus. They're written in a style we're not familiar with today, and even when translated into a modern language, the messages seem obscure and hard to grasp. When you first read these books with their strange symbols and peculiar visions, you think, how could these writings tell me anything about my future? But prophecy is like a puzzle, and when you put certain elements together, it does start to have meaning. Today I'm going to give you 4 important principles that can help you begin to make some sense of the puzzle of prophecy. The first of these principles is to recognize that prophecies were often revealed in symbolic language. Today we have symbols that we recognize, but they might not mean anything to people living 200 or 300 years from now. In the same way, when you read the prophecies in the book of Daniel, you come across many things you don't understand.
And 4 great beasts came up from the sea. And 4 great beasts.
First was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. Suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear.
There was another, like a leopard.
which had on its back 4 wings of a bird.
After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, the 4 beasts, dreadful, terrible, exceedingly strong.
Winged lions, 4-headed leopards, and strange beasts that seem to come right out of the pages of science fiction. It's definitely not in the style that we would tell a story today. But remember, these prophecies were written in a world very different from ours. It was a time when events and people were represented by strange and fanciful creatures. God was speaking through the prophets in the language of their time. But we've not been left in the dark about what these symbols mean. You see, the Bible interprets itself. Let me give you a quick example of this. Let's look in the book of the Apocalypse, or Revelation, chapter 12, verse 3. It speaks of a great fiery red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now, are we to take this literally, or is this a symbol for something else? Well, right here in the same chapter, in verse 9, we're given the meaning. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. Clearly, the dragon is a symbol for Satan the devil. The student of Bible prophecy soon begins to understand these symbols. But it's important to really let the Bible interpret itself. Don't be too quick to accept just any interpretation. The Apostle Peter gives us just such a warning when he says, "No prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation." Now let's look at a second key to unlocking the understanding of prophecy. It is duality. Prophecies that are to be fulfilled at different times are often revealed at the same time. This can be a little confusing until you understand it. Most of the prophecies of the Bible were revealed in a 300-year period between the 8th and 5th centuries B.C. The prophets spoke against a backdrop of the events of their day. There are many prophecies specifically addressed to ancient Israel and Judah and other nations like Egypt and Syria. Many of those prophecies were fulfilled in that time. But other prophecies involving these nations have details that were not fulfilled in historic times. They couldn't have been, so they must be for another time. One of the most significant events in Old Testament history was the fall of the nations of ancient Israel and Judah to their enemies. The prophets warned the people of their day of impending doom unless those people changed their ways. But at the same time, the prophets also gave a message of hope when Israel and Judah, as well as the whole world, would be at peace. For example, look at these scriptures in the 2nd chapter of Isaiah. Remember, Isaiah was prophesying at a time when Judah was in deep spiritual trouble. The nation and its capital city, Jerusalem, were threatened by enemies. A century or so after this prophecy, it was invaded, and the people were taken into exile. The future looked grim. But what did Isaiah also prophesy at this same time? Notice verse 2. "Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills." Remember that mountain and hills represent large and small nations or governments. This verse shows that there would be a time when God's government would be established to a position of prominence. That didn't seem very likely when this was written. But notice Isaiah said this would happen in a time he calls the latter days. This expression crops up often in prophecy. It refers to a time when God himself begins to intervene in world events to establish his kingdom on earth. Notice what Isaiah says in verse 3. Many people shall come and say, "Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths." And here in verse 4, he shall judge between the nations and shall rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. Isaiah wrote this when the nations of the ancient Middle East were either at war or preparing for war. God was using the circumstances of the kingdom of ancient Judah to give advanced details of a kingdom he would establish in the latter days. When are the latter days? Certainly not in the 6th century BC when this nation was in desperate danger, nor any time since. We know the history of those people from that time to this. Never have they or any other people been able to beat their swords into plowshares and not learn war anymore. Isaiah was describing an event that hasn't happened yet, but he was describing it in the same breath, so to speak, as he was talking about his own times. So when reading prophecy, it's important to keep in mind the principle of duality. The prophet may be using an event in the past to give us important information about the future. And as you begin to familiarize yourself with Bible prophecy, you'll see this principle of duality more and more. So these are two important principles to understanding how the Bible tells us about the future. First, remember that prophecy is written in symbols and that the Bible interprets those symbols. And secondly, prophecy is often revealed in duality. We'll look at some further principles of prophecy later in the program, but first I would like to offer you one of our most recent publications, one designed to help you make sense of the Bible's predictions about the future. If you've ever wanted to understand the prophetic books of the Bible, you'll find this new booklet, Introduction to Prophecy, exceptionally helpful. It takes you step by step towards understanding what these ancient prophecies are all about, and more importantly, what they mean for us today. This chapter explains the background of the prophets and shows you how their prophecies go together to build a framework in which we're able to fit the events of our modern world. Another chapter, Unfinished Business, explains how many of the Old Testament prophecies weren't totally fulfilled then and how they also refer to events of the future. The next couple of chapters, Jesus and Prophecy and A Voice Across Time, give you keys from the New Testament to help you better understand prophecy by linking events of the Old Testament with those of today. And the last chapter, So Now What, explains how prophecy is not just given to provide us with intellectual stimulation, but also provide us with critical information. Introduction to Prophecy will help you begin to gain a new perspective about the past, the present, and most importantly, the future. Be sure to request your free copy of Introduction to Prophecy. And if you're not already a subscriber, we'll also be sending you a free year subscription to the Plain Truth magazine. The Plain Truth is a news and family magazine that relates the events of our modern world to the prophecies of the Bible. The Plain Truth will help you sort out what's really important from what's merely sensational. Now, all of our literature is absolutely free of charge, with no cost or obligation whatsoever. And I'll be offering both of these free publications again at the end of the program. We've already looked at two important principles to help us understand prophecy in today's program. Now let's look at the third one, the identity of modern nations. If the Bible is to shed some light on events in the modern world, how does it identify today's nations? Well, in some cases, this is a simple matter. Some nations mentioned in the prophetic passages of the Bible are still called by the same names, and they are basically in the same locations as when prophecy was written. For example, Egypt, Syria, Libya, Ethiopia, and Lebanon. In other cases, a nation may have changed its name, but the people can still be identified. Modern Jordan today is referred to in the Bible as Moab and Ammon, two brothers who descended from the nephew of the patriarch Abraham. And many of the people in that area recognize their historic origins. The same is true of most of the Arab people. They know they have a common ancestor, Ishmael, the son of Abraham by Hagar. So the nations in and around the Middle East are the easiest to identify. But when we come to some of the major powers in the world today, it's more difficult. When Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel wrote, there was no United States, no Soviet Union, no France, no Britain, no Canada, or no Germany. But you can't explain the modern world unless you acknowledge its major powers. The Bible does include them in the prophecies, even if it doesn't mention their modern names. Let me give you an example. Using what we have already learned about symbols and duality, let's look again at Daniel's fascinating prophecies. The book traces a historic progression of 4 great empires that began in Daniel's time and continued on to what the Bible calls the latter days. In the 7th chapter of his book, Daniel tells us how he saw this panorama of history in a series of strange symbolic creatures. The first symbol, a winged lion, represented the Babylonians who ruled the Middle East in Daniel's time. Then, using other symbols, which the book interprets, we see the Babylonians were replaced by the Persians, represented by a bear. They, in turn, were to be supplanted by the Greeks, who were symbolized by a 4-headed flying leopard. Then, a 4th empire, stronger and more formidable than any of the others, comes to power. History identified this as the Roman Empire, which lasted until the 5th century A.D. But the Roman system was prophesied to endure in various forms on through the centuries, and this, in fact, is what happened. By comparing the detailed prophecies with the historical record, we can see how Daniel was giving us an accurate forecast of the flow of Western civilization from his time down through the centuries to our own. The story of the Romans and their cultural descendants, such as the Holy Roman Empire of the Middle Ages, shows how the Bible has identified modern peoples. It shows us there is a thread running through history, linking events that we might otherwise consider unrelated. You begin to see in a different light the events that shape the world as it is today. And even more significantly, you can see the trends that are even now shaping the future. And when you begin to understand this, world news begins to make sense in a way it never has before. But now let's move on to a 4th important principle, and that's the time frame of Bible prophecy. When we think of European history, we tend to divide it into such eras as the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and modern times. The Bible does something very similar when it describes prophetic events. I began to show you this when I explained what Isaiah meant by the latter days. When we look at the story of mankind as revealed in the Bible, we see that there is a time called the beginning, referring to the creation of man on the earth. Several thousand years have been allotted to man, during which he has been given the freedom to pursue his own way, to devise his own cultures and civilizations, to do what is right in his own eyes, apart from God and the laws of God. The Bible refers to it as this age or this world. It's followed by a time referred to as the end time or the time of the end. Then comes the time Isaiah prophesied about when the world would be at peace and all nations would flow to the mountain or government of God to learn of his ways. Many prophecies tell of this time. It's a vital key to understanding one of the most misunderstood concepts of the teachings of Jesus Christ. As the Bible shows, God's dealings with man are not open-ended, stretching out into eternity under the present conditions. There is an end in sight according to the predictions of the Bible. Prophecies from both the Old and New Testaments show that the kingdom of God will be established at a time when human civilization has reached a crisis point. Jesus Christ also talked about this time in history. He said that at a certain moment in time, called the latter days or the end time, he would return. Now, naturally, we'd like to know when this will happen. But when Jesus was asked point blank by his disciples when it would be, he answered, "But of that day and hour no one knows, no, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only." If we understand prophecy, we can know in general terms when the time of God's intervention is near. And as regular viewers of this program know, there are many reasons to believe that we are in those end times and latter days. We're moving towards a very critical point in world events. So once you have used your understanding of prophecy to build a frame, you can begin to see the news of the day in perspective. A war here, a treaty there, some nations coming together or drifting apart. No longer are they isolated events, but important pieces of the complete picture which fit into the overall framework of Bible prophecy. So today we've looked at 4 principles of prophecy. First, symbolism. Second, duality. Third, the identity of modern nations. Fourth, the time frame of events. These 4 principles will help us put together the puzzle of prophecy. But now we must take all of this one step further and ask an important question. What is the purpose of prophecy? Well, the Bible does reveal the answer to this vital question, and it shows us that prophecy is not given to provide us with intellectual stimulation. It's not just an inspired jigsaw puzzle. It's a message with a purpose. You see, understanding prophecy alone is not enough. The Bible teaches that understanding carries with it a personal responsibility. Actually, this is a principle that holds true for all the teachings of the Bible, whether it's prophetic, doctrinal, or personal instruction, as the book of James shows. The Apostle James tells us to be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. So those who want to understand prophecy but don't want to act upon it are in danger of missing the point. Prophecy is given to us, not just so we can know about the future, but so that we can be motivated to be ready for it. Let's look again at that answer Jesus gave when his disciples asked him when he was coming to establish his kingdom. In Matthew 24, verse 42, he said, "Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming." And in verse 44, "Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour when you do not expect him." In other words, Jesus said, it's not for you to know exactly when I'm returning, but you should be alert and ready at all times. So while the understanding of prophecy is a fascinating study, it's important to understand that it also carries with it a personal responsibility. Our world is changing, and not necessarily always for the better. You need to know more about what's going on, and you can as you understand the framework of events as revealed in these invaluable prophetic books of the Bible. Now, to help you better understand this important subject of prophecy, I'd like to once again offer you today's free literature, Introduction to Prophecy, and the Plain Truth magazine. First, let me tell you about this intriguing booklet, Introduction to Prophecy. It's designed to help guide you through the first steps in understanding prophecy, even if you've never read the prophetic books of the Bible before. Chapter 1, But Prophecy Doesn't Make Sense, shows you why these ancient writings, which seem at first so obscure, are important for us even in this 20th century. Chapter 2 gives you the background of the prophets. We've covered some of that in the program today, but there's more you need to understand. Chapter 3 will show you that all prophecy wasn't fulfilled in the days of the Old Testament, that there's much unfinished business or prophecy yet to be completed. Chapter 4 explains how Jesus Christ was also a prophet. Chapter 5, A Voice Across Time, takes a look at the Apocalypse, or book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, which is the key in understanding how many other prophecies fit together. And the last chapter, So Now What?, explains that prophecy was written with more in mind than just to intellectually stimulate us. It also contains an important message for all of us. With this booklet, Introduction to Prophecy, you'll begin to see how the prophecies of the Bible, far from being obscure and hard to understand, fit together to give us a whole new understanding of the past, the present, and most importantly, the future. Be sure to request your free copy. And if you're not already a subscriber to our magazine, The Plain Truth, we'll also be sending along a free subscription for as long as you'd like. If ever there was a need to understand the world you live in, it's today. And that's what this remarkable magazine is, a magazine of understanding. Each month, the Plain Truth examines the really important issue, world news, social problems, and topics like the one we've covered today. It'll give you biblical insight so that you can understand the events that will affect your country, your family, and yourself. An example is this article, Jerusalem, a fire in the city of God. Throughout its long history, this ancient city has been fought over more than any other on earth. The tensions between Jewish, Muslim, and Christian factions over this holy city pose an ever-present threat to peace in the area. This article shows how Bible prophecy reveals that Jerusalem will soon become the focal point of events that will have global impact. With articles such as these, we know you'll find the Plain Truth helpful and informative. There's no magazine like it, and there's absolutely no subscription price. It's yours free for as long as you'd like. So once again, be sure to request today's free literature, this booklet, Introduction to Prophecy, and a free subscription to the Plain Truth magazine. Please telephone for the cost of a local call, 008-074-222. That's 008-074-222. We have many operators waiting, but if you don't get through right away, call us again in 10 or 15 minutes. That's 008-074-222. Now, some of you may prefer to write to us for today's free literature. Then simply address your request to The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. That's The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. We certainly hope you've enjoyed our program today. Now here's a preview of what's coming up next week on The World Tomorrow. Marriage, a commitment to love and honor till death do us part. Or at least that's how it begins. Yet today, more and more marriages are ending in divorce, leaving a trail of broken dreams, heartache, and shattered lives. In today's complex world, is it possible to have a strong, happy marriage that lasts a lifetime? Don't miss next week's insightful program, Improving Your Marriage. Thanks for being with us today. I'm David Albert for The World Tomorrow.
The preceding program and all literature were produced and sponsored